I'm Carlos Vega at Roosevelt Junior High School. I'm interviewing Miss Mary Booker.
The date?
The date is November 30th, 1999. So, where were you born?
I was born on Piedmont Road and the East End, and as you may know, the Piedmont Road is over next to the interstate, and down from Lately Field runs there. It runs from Malden almost to Slack Street in Charleston. It was one of the main thoroughfares.
When were you born?
I was born December the 1st, 1931. I'm happy to be 67 years old.
Well, did you have any nicknames growing up?
My nickname is Pudgy, P-U-D-G-I-E. Don't ask me why, because I'm not a fatty.
Okay. What occupations or jobs have you had over the years?
I started out as a young girl babysitting at home when I was 14, and then I went on to work for a company called Arlen's, and there I was their office manager for 10 years. From there I went to Union Carbide Corporation as an accountant in sales accounting department, and I worked there for 18 years and I retired there.
Do you have any interesting stories from your childhood?
From my job?
Childhood job,
from my childhood.
anytime.
Oh yes, many interesting stories from my childhood. I come from a very large family. My parents, my father was one of 15 children, and they lived in a very large house on Piedmont Road. It was 2.5 stories, and naturally there were lots of us around. Growing up, there were anywhere from 50 to 75 children visiting Mom and Pop during a weekend. And so I had lots of playmates and lots of fun. We had large trees to climb. We played lots of marbles. I like to play Span. I don't know if you know what that is. It's one of the marble games. We played baseball, and all the girls had to learn to play baseball and football. And we just had lots of fun growing up.
How old was this house that you lived in?
I don't really know how old it was, but it was a tavern before my grandparents bought it. So it had lots of creaky things and scary stories that were told about the house. And it was fun being there. And one of the things that I remember most about my grandfather was, as a little girl growing up, that he was part Indian, and he would peel apples and never let it break. And then he would scoop the apple out with a spoon and feed each one of us as we sat at his feet, and he would tell us stories. And he also always gave us sips of his coffee out of the saucer, and he would give us crackers with sardines.
Sounds nice. What are some of your earliest memories from where you lived?
Well, it was called many things where we lived, because our property ran from Piedmont Road to Milton Street. And it was called Lawson's Plantation at one time. It was called Lawson's Place at one time. And it was called, which we have always said, Lawson's Alley, because everyone that lived there was our family. And I guess one of the earliest memories I have growing up there is the great big tree that was in the yard that we had a double swing in with tires that had been taken off the old cars. And we would double decker and swing and swing. And then also one memory was sleigh riding with our parents. We would always build a great big bonfire, have baked potatoes and marshmallows, and we would sleigh ride, the parents and the children. We always did things together.
Where would you go sleigh riding?
Lots of times right there in the alley, other times down Piedmont Road. We would go up on Farnsworth Drive. I don't know if you know where that is. It's where City Park was. And that was a wonderful thing too. Where they have the housing unit up there now off Farnsworth Drive was called City Park. and that's where we played during the summer and the winter. We'd go all the way up to the gates of the cemetery and sleigh ride down Farnsworth Drive into Piedmont Road, down to Morris Street, and cross the railroad tracks, almost to Kroger store on Smith Street. Fun.
What schools did you go to
I
growing up?
attended Boyd Elementary and Junior High School, and I graduated from Garnet High School in 1949.
Where were these located, or are they still around? I'm not sure.
No, Boyd School and Boyd Elementary and Junior High. It's now Jacob Arbor's on Jacob Street. And Garnet High School is still there. It's on the National Registry, and we hope it'll forever be there, because as far as we're concerned, it's one of the best schools that ever was.
I see you have some books with you.
Yes,
What are-
I have a book called The Black Past by James Randall and Anna Evans Gilmer. And it has a national registry of all the schools, the churches, and the businesses and organizations that we remember. There's a picture on the front of the old Boyd School and one of the old churches and the Mattavely Home, which is still on Donnelly Street. The other book is called Garnet from 1900 to 1956. It takes us back from the time Garnet was organized until it closed during integration. And I also have a book called The Lawson Trust Reunion that was held in Atlanta, Georgia, August the 7th through the 9th, 1998. And it features a picture of my grandparents, plus it has the story of their lives inside of it, starting our history.
What was it like going to school before integration?
Well, our segregated schools were wonderful. We did not even realize the difference, because whatever we were given book-wise, we used, and we had the most wonderful teachers. They made you realize that no matter what, that you had to excel. And teachers not only taught from our books, but they taught us about living, and they taught health, and they wanted you to be the best that you could be. That saying now, as a slogan for the United States Army, was back during my time growing up in a segregated school, because each teacher taught you that they wanted you to be the best that you could be. And our schools were wonderful. The teachers were kind and understanding. You could always go to them. And going to Garnet was one of the most beautiful experiences you could have, because we had our football teams, our basketball and track teams. The girls had their teams, and our band won contest after contest no matter where we went. And it was wonderful just going to school there. And I was a majorette, and I loved it. And I don't think that, and I'm not saying it in a negative way, but I don't think that integration really helped us that much, because our children lost so much. Going to Garnet, I went to at least 5 balls a year where you dressed up in your evening gowns and the boys in their best Sunday suits. And we had wonderful times. It was just wonderful to go to our school. We were given so much.
Do you have any clear memories or standing memories of your favorite teachers or just events
Yes,
from your
I
schools?
do.
Can you share
I
some with us?
had one very, very favorite teacher, and his name was Mr. Henry Davis. And Mr. Davis taught me math and Spanish. And Mr. Davis named each one of the students in his class, and I was a Mariposa, and Mariposa was a beautiful butterfly. And Mr. Davis was such a kind man. He wasn't one of these red, big, husky fellows. He was just a little short man, but he was so compassionate and so kind, and a very, very good teacher.
Did you ever get into any trouble at school?
I sure did. There was only one time that I ever got in trouble, and there was a trial going on at the courthouse because a soldier had been beaten on a Greyhound bus. And our civics teacher, Mr. James Jarrett, took the 12th grade to that trowel because he was going to use it as a class project. But he wouldn't take us as 11th grade class, and so we all decided that we were going to the trowel anyway. So we all skipped school, and we went to the trowel. And the next day, you had to have an excuse to get back in school, so naturally, everybody wrote their own excuses, and I wrote mine too, because my parents didn't know that I had taken off from school to go. And when I went to the office, the principal, Mr. Scotty Brown, was a friend of my dad's, and he knew my dad had not let me take off to go to that trial, so I had to get my dad on the phone at work. And so I was in trouble at school, and I was in trouble at home, but it all ended up all right anyway.
Do you have any friends from school that you have kept in touch with through the years?
Oh, yes. My very best friend was Margaret Evans, and she's Margaret Evans Sawyers now, and she lives in Ohio, and we have been in touch the whole time. But my class as a whole has stayed in touch. We have a Christmas party every year, and we have a picnic during the summer. And some of the classmates come back to visit just for those two events from out of state. So our class has always stayed together, and we've always had little class meetings or reunions aside from the school reunion that's held every three years.
What was your favorite thing to do with your friends?
Hang out in the drugstore. There was a drugstore on the corner from the school, and it was Doc Solomon and Doc Mitchell's, and that's where everybody met after school and sometimes in the evening just to listen to the music on the jukebox and to talk.
What chores did you have when you were a child that were normal to you but nowadays would be considered out of the ordinary?
Well, not anything that to me was out of the ordinary, because I was the oldest of 7 children, and I had to watch the kids, I had to wash dishes. And growing up, we were all taught to be independent, so I washed my own clothes when I was in high school and took care of them. I did my own hair, I washed it and took care of it, as well as taking care of my little sister and a couple of cousins.
Did you have any favorite toys or games?
Not really favorites, because our mom helped us make doll clothes, and we had paper dolls, and we played jacks and dominoes. As a family, we did everything together, so nothing was really a favorite.
Did you play any sports, or do you have any special games that you played?
Growing up, by being just 2 girls in a family of 5 boys, we had to learn to play baseball and football, and it was lots of fun. And during the evenings, by having a family place of our own, we got to stay out after dark sometimes and play under the street light at the end of the alley. And we played Mama May I and Posen and hide and seek, and we played these after dark. And other kids in our community or the streets close by would come to our place to play. So we had lots of friends and family around at all times. Played lots of games.
Were there any areas that you weren't allowed to go to as a child?
Yes. We were told not to go past Capitol Street when I was growing up. And the only problem with that was after I was in high school, we had some cousins that moved to Washington Manor, which had been built, and I babysat for them. So after I got in high school, I was allowed to go past Capitol Street.
Where exactly was Washington Manor located?
Washington Manor is located where it's still there, and Washington Manor is bound by Washington Street and Donnelly Street and Margaret Street and Clendenin Street. It's right on the edge of the Elk River.
Were there any places that you were afraid to go to?
Well, yes. There was a place farther up in the East End that was called Wirtz Avenue, or it was called Wilson's Hall at the time, and we weren't allowed to go there. But there were certain restrictions, because there were places that you knew that if you didn't live there, you didn't go there. And so that was one of the places I wasn't allowed to go, and I would have been afraid to go anyway.
Did you belong to any clubs or groups?
Yes, when I was in high school, I did. I belonged to the dramatic club, and I belonged to the glee club, as well as the band. And I belonged to what was called the Sunbeams in my church. I was the secretary. And we raised money by having hot dog sales and little rummage sales. And we also gave the fountain that was the baptismal fountain at our church, Simpson Methodist.
What did you do during the summer for fun?
I went to the country to stay with my grandmother because I had an aunt that was only a year older than I was, and we were very good friends, and I loved the country.
What did the men in your neighborhood do when they were together, sort of like tell stories or gossip or talk politics, for example?
Well, most of the time they worked on cars, or like I said before, in our family, the men and the kids played together. They taught their sons to play baseball, and they taught them how to play football the correct way, and they just did everything with their kids. Mostly, it wasn't just them off by themselves. They shared their lives with their children.
Do you have any memories or opinions that you would just like to talk about?
Yes, I remember growing up that I lived in an integrated neighborhood, and that was not one of the things that was so prevalent in Charleston. But it was kind of sad that after school every day, that the kids that I was growing up with, the white kids, they came straight to our place to play. And sometimes they slept over at night. They always ate with us. But the next morning, I had to pass by Roosevelt to get to Boyd. And then when I went to high school, I had to pass by Charleston High to get to Garnet. But yet and still, we were best friends. Even now, there are some families that wanted to know how come, since we've started having family reunions, that they haven't been invited, because they still remember sleepovers and eating at our house and playing with us. It was as though there was no difference between any of us until time to go to school. So it's hard to even imagine the people that never had the privilege of growing up in an integrated neighborhood and really truly not knowing that there was a difference between a white child and a black child.
Any others?
Yeah, one memory I have of my first job when I became office manager at Arlen's department store. It was a hurting situation, but people would come to the store and they would want someone to wait on them. They'd come to the service desk and say that there was no one in a certain department to wait on them. And one day, a patron came in and they kept asking for help at the service desk, and the manager asked me to come out of the office and help this lady. And when I walked out, she said, "You." And I wanted to know, well, who do you want? The Queen of Sheba? Because it was just unreal to me that even in 1960, there were people that didn't even want a black person to wait on them in a store. And I wasn't used to that anyway. I just thought that people were people, and it didn't matter to me one way or the other.
Did your neighborhood have any specific or just celebrations or holidays that were celebrated there only?
Not really, because all the holidays were celebrated the same as anybody else. We had big Christmases, and we had our plays and so forth at our churches, and Halloween, we had little parties. One of the most wonderful memories I have of us during the summer, and kids don't seem to do this anymore, is that all of us would get together and have little parties at somebody's house every Saturday. And our parties would start at 8 o'clock, and we'd dance, and we'd have Kool-Aid and cookies, and that would be our entertainment for the week. And our parties always had to let out by 12 o'clock because everybody's kids had to be home. There was curfew, and everybody knew they had to keep their curfew.
How old were you when you saw your first movie?
I really don't remember, but I guess I was probably in high school. We had what was called the Ferguson Theater, and it was in the Ferguson Hotel, and that's torn down now. The Motel 8 and Fairfield Inn are there in the spot where the Ferguson Hotel and the movie theater were.
How do you get around Charleston now?
I have my own car. When I was growing up, though, there was only one car in the family, and my dad used that car only to go back and forth to work. We walked everywhere. Or then, I guess when I was in high school, we started riding the bus everywhere.
Were there any neighborhood characters?
Oh, sure. In every neighborhood, there's always a character. We had one character that it was a young man. He was really funny, and he did lots of crazy things, and I don't quite remember what his name was, but he lived on the corner from us. And he was fun, but he was harmless. He just did tricky things to the kids. He was older, but he wasn't quite grown up.
What was the funniest thing that happened when you were growing up in the East End?
Funniest thing? I really don't know. I have no idea.
Well, what were some of the biggest changes that happened while you were growing up there?
It's hard to know because growing up one of the biggest things was changing City Park, because that was one of the most beautiful places for us to go and to play and to be safe. And they closed down City Park and made the housing unit up there. So that was one of the biggest changes that affected most of us, because it took away the best place we had to go and play. And then so many of the stores closed that were in our neighborhood, because there was a fish market and a fish store where a Reverend Williams sold fish sandwiches, and he had his little restaurant. There was Tony Romeo's grocery store, and it closed, and we had Rickard's grocery store, and it closed. It's just so many things. And we had Moore Street Pharmacy, and that's gone now. That was run by Dr. Harris. So everything really has changed in the neighborhood, because the interstate took a lot of the houses and a lot of the businesses, and that just made our neighborhood totally, because it even took my grandparents' home. So lots has changed over there. You would not really know our neighborhood because of the interstate and how it took so many houses. WCHS is right at the corner from where I lived, and that took a lot of space that we had, and a lot of houses and families were displaced over there.
What do you think will happen over the next 10 years to this area?
Well, I'm hoping and praying that they won't tear down all of the beautiful homes that used to be here and displace all of the people like they did down in the lower end of Charleston, when they displaced everybody, when they put in the town center mall and the new apartment down there because it's not that many places for people to go now, and you'll have a city without homes and families, and that's not right because we need our schools and the homes that are here so that people will know what neighborhood is like and not move out far away and displace too many people.
Back to schools and segregation, how many black schools were there in West Virginia?
There were 33 black schools in West Virginia, and most of those schools were closed, and very few of them were kept open and used as the main school in the city that they were in.
Do you have any interesting facts about colleges in West Virginia?
Well, in my opinion, West Virginia State College has always been one of the best colleges around. West Virginia State had some of the most accredited teachers in the United States, and it was one of the better colleges for a student to attend. As you may or may not know, it was a segregated all-black college until after integration. And we had so many lieutenant colonels that have come back and been honored at West Virginia State College because they left the ROTC as second lieutenants and went into the Army. And they have excelled. And West Virginia State College's football teams used to be some of the best. There was called a Capital Classic, which was played in at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and everybody loved to go to the Capital Classic, which was played between West Virginia State and Howard University. And I know sometimes I get real hyped up, and last year I was very upset with a lot of the TV stations because I called in to one and asked them why we never got any reports on West Virginia State College's football team. They never gave their scores. They never had anything run back. And I noticed this year at WCHS that they always give us some coverage, and I appreciate that a lot.
You mentioned something when I had the tape off about the graduate college being taken out of the state college.
West Virginia State College did have part of the graduate college that is now in South Charleston up on the hill by Carbide.
At Garnet High School, how did your basketball team do?
We had quite a few championship teams. Garnet's Hall of Fame had their banquet this year, and we advertised for members of any basketball, football, baseball, or track team that had been on a championship team to call in and give us that information. And that night we honored 41 members of championship teams dating back to 1922 right up until school closed in 1956. So we have had quite a few champions, athletic-wise, as well as our band, Glee Club, and our drama club.
In this book, it talks about a loss and trust family reunion. Can you give me an overview of what happens during this?
We started in 1968 with a family picnic to see if we could start a family reunion with our family. And it was called the Loss and Trust Reunion because my grandmother was a Trust and my grandfather was a Lawson. And at that picnic, it was held in Coonskin Park. We had 168 members of our family to come in from all over the United States, and we started our first family reunion. The last family reunion we had was in August 1998, and it was held in Atlanta, Georgia. We have been to Georgia, Texas, Michigan, Maryland, and here in Charleston for our reunions. There have been as many as 200 and some family members that have come to our family reunions. And it has been dedicated to our grandparents, James Harrison Lawson, who was the first black miller in Kanawha County, and our grandmother, Mary Jane Truss Lawson, who was the first licensed midwife in Kanawha County. They were the parents of 15 children, and at our last family reunion, we had no aunts and uncles living, and all of those that were in attendance were the descendants of those children, and it was a wonderful affair. Not only do we have a family reunion, but we have a picnic every year, and we have a Christmas party, and it's only cousins that are there because there are no family adults that have survived. The last aunt that died was 92 years old, and she died in 1997. And we have a very large, loving family that was taught that we must always be together. And we were taught that the family that prays together stays together, and that's what we have tried to do.
Are you done? Is there anything that he didn't ask you that you want to add?
No, I think he's done a very good job, and I've truly enjoyed being here with him today, and I hope that whatever I've related to him will help him in his work.
Well, thank you.